The folks at Groenfell Meadery up in Vermont are launching their next sour series release this weekend called Meaderitaville. Meaderitaville is the fourth in the Havoc Sour series and will be just as twisted and delicious as previous series sours, Rumble, Curmudgeon, and Sour Mead Maker. Meaderitaville is inspired by dreams of the beach, and Nate at the Meadery calls it beach bum chic. Meaderitaville will have a pineapple base with added orange, lime, and agave nectar to amp up the Arita factor. And yes, it will be finished sour. Check it out along with all the other deliciously drinkable Groenfell and Havoc meads at family-owned and operated Groenfell.com. That's Groennfell. Welcome to Basic Brewing Radio for Thursday, June 10th, 2021. I'm James Spencer. Here at Basic Brewing Radio, we're all about home brewing. This week, Dr. Keith Villa, creator of Blue Moon, talks about his latest venture, CERIA Brewing Company, producer of non-alcoholic and cannabis-infused beers. Keith also talks about his upcoming book, Brewing with Cannabis, using THC and CBD in beer. If you go to basicbrewing.com, you can find archives of our audio and video shows. And if you go to basicbrewingshop.com, you can find our DVDs and our brewers' logbooks. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Basic Brewing and find our show page on Facebook as well. If you want to support us financially, check out patreon.com/basicbrewing. And thanks to everybody who's helping out in that way. If you go to patreon.com/basicbrewing, you can see a long list of stuff that you can access if you sign up as a supporter. Financial supporters this Friday will see the next video episode featuring my 100% Rausch Maltz smoked beer. Now, this one is being released out of sequence, so you'll see Steve back in the little on-screen window sitting at his shop because we recorded this one before getting vaccinated. And I reserve the option of having Steve in the little window because it's easier for him rather than driving all the way out here to the house. But maybe we can meet halfway and record some episodes, maybe outside somewhere fun in the future. The general public has seen our episode that we did record together about my no-boil pineapple puree NEPA, and they apparently liked it. Lots of comments on YouTube rejoicing in the fact that we were together in the kitchen. Several said they were adding this recipe to their list of brews to do. And if you'll remember, this was the extract beer that I just brought up to boiling and shut off the heat as I added 6 ounces of Centennial for a 10-minute hop stand. And then I added the pineapple puree post-fermentation in the keg. Kurt on YouTube asked any idea of what the IBU level would be of adding that 6 ounces at flame out for 30 minutes instead of the 10 minutes. Well, I consulted a couple of IBU calculators, and they both estimated around 200 IBUs, although I think that's way too high. Since the Centennials were at 11.9% alpha acid, I do think that letting them sit at near boiling temperature for half an hour would kind of unbalance the beer toward the bitter side, probably. 10 minutes seemed just the right amount of time for that amount of hops at that amount of alpha acid level. In my opinion. Your mileage may vary. Nick on YouTube asked, I'm new to home brewing with about 12 5-gallon batches, all kegged, under my belt. I'm intrigued with this process. How much time was this brew day? How soon after brew day did you drink the beer? This all seems quick. It was quick, and that's what she said. From turning the heat on until reaching boiling or just at boiling for that 5 gallons or 19 liters, it took right at 30 minutes. Then at the 10-minute hop stand, and then around 25 minutes to chill down to pitching temperature with the water temperature in my water hose that day. So the whole brew day, without setup and cleanup, was a tiny bit over an hour. So it fermented for 5 days, and then sat in the keg for 2 or 3 days before the beer was carbonated and started running fairly clear. So using extract is more expensive, but essentially what you're paying for is time. It was a much shorter brew day than if I had done that all grain. And one of the reasons that brew day was so fast, even with extract, was thanks to my electric brew-in-a-bag system that I got from our sponsors Desiree and Dave from High Gravity in Tulsa. And I'm spoiled because I got the 240-volt version with the 4,500-watt Blickman boil coil. But if you get the 120-volt version of the Warthog brew-in-a-bag system, one advantage that it has over other systems is that you can put the smaller system on your stovetop and boost it with your burner. At the same time, you're using the electric burner inside, or the electric element inside the system. And then once you hit your desired strike temp or boiling, you can just turn off your stovetop and let the Warthog system take full control. And you can't do that with every electric setup. Just think of the systems that are out there. And, they have plastic bottoms or whatever. But this is just essentially, a kettle with an element inside, so you can just put it up on your stovetop. As I say, you can't do that with every electric setup, but even the smaller Warthog system has lots of power to get the job done. It just takes a little more patience, a little more time than its 240-volt sibling. But the great thing about shopping for electric systems on highgravitybrew.com is you can configure a system to your wants and desires, from 5 gallons to 2 barrels, and whether it's single, 2, or 3 vessels, highgravitybrew.com can help you take the pain out of propane. Check them all out at family-owned and operated highgravitybrew.com. And High Gravity has a YouTube channel where you can see their Warthog systems in action, including a video with Steve and me explaining all the differences between the 120-volt brew-in-a-bag system and the 240-volt system. You know who else has a YouTube channel? Our friends and sponsors at Imperial Organic Yeast. On their new YouTube channel, you can see some well-produced videos from Imperial, including those showing how you can do tests like forced fermentation, wort stability, and a diacetyl force test. You remember Casey from Imperial and I talking about those on the show. You'll also see a video on how to properly build a yeast starter. Now, I know that I say my stir plate is dusty because I don't make starters for moderate gravity 5-gallon batches, thanks to Imperial's 200 billion cell pitch rate. But say you're doing a high-gravity beer, or one that's more than 5 gallons, or if you've got a packet of Imperial yeast that's gone way past the 4-month recommended shelf life, you might want to make a starter in those cases. Head over to Imperial's YouTube channel and find out the proper way to do that. You can also see a time-lapse video to show the dramatic difference that it makes to pitch with 200, 150, 150 billion cells, and it is dramatic. Ask your local homebrew store about Imperial Organic Yeast, or check them out on YouTube or imperialyeast.com. That's imperialyeast.com. Forgot to mention that my airlock is usually bubbling before bedtime with Imperial. Now, even though it's legal in a growing number of states, I know that brewing with cannabis may still be controversial to some of you out there. I'm a cannabis lightweight myself, but when I got the opportunity to talk to Keith Villa, I thought it was a great idea. Not only is he a pioneer in the new field of THC and CBD beers, he's been an influential figure in craft beer and commercial brewing. So I wanted to start the conversation with Keith, talking a bit about his background and a bit about American craft beer history. Keith Villa, welcome to Basic Brewing Radio.
Well, thank you, James. Thanks for having me on today. Pleasure to be here, and hopefully we can have some fun.
Oh, I hope so, too. Your resume, I got sent a document with your resume, and it's lengthy, and we could have 4 shows out of different topics. You've done quite a bit, and not the least of which is founding Blue Moon, which is in the refrigerator downstairs in our garage in the beer fridge. Of the quote unquote macro brews, that's the one that makes an appearance at our house. So talk a bit about how you didn't. A lot of the brewers that I talked to, or the people in beer that I talked to, get into beer and into brewing via home brewing, but you came about it in a more formal way.
Right. Yeah. You're absolutely right. Quite a few people get into to beer and brewing and become professionals because they were home brewers. But I got in formally. I got a PhD in brewing from the University of Brussels. And I think I'm one of just a handful of people in the world that has a PhD in brewing from Belgium. So it's but I'll even back up from there and say that I did start homebrewing as a hobby. And I guess that I would probably get it grouped into that group of people who went in because of their homebrewing hobby. Because when I originally went to the University of Colorado in Boulder for my undergrad degree in molecular biology, I was headed to medical school, and I was working hard to get into medical school. That was my goal, and it was in my sophomore year, maybe my junior year. I saw some people handing out flyers on the Pearl Street Mall, which if you're in Boulder ever to visit the American Homebrewing Association headquarters, or actually the Brewers Association headquarters, all the same in the same building. The original headquarters was right there on the end of Pearl Street, which is a kind of a famous walking mall in Boulder. I happened to be there, and there were people handing out flyers. It was like learn how to homebrew. At first, I thought they were kind of like the typical Hare Krishnas and Jesus freaks that hang out on the mall and asking for donations, but these were actually homebrewers. And it was funny because at that time, it would have been about 1982. Homebrewing had just been legalized 4 years earlier, I think. It was, and a lot of your listeners probably are familiar with the fact that homebrewing was illegal in the United States for a long, long time and was eventually legalized under the Carter administration. Jimmy Carter, I think he's from Arkansas.
Georgia, but close.
Okay. But he, under his administration, homebrewing was legalized in 1978. And immediately after that, the American Homebrewing Association and the Brewers Association were formed up in Boulder, Colorado, to be the headquarters for homebrewers and what we know today as craft brewers. And so that was 1978. And then I happened to be up in the college campus in 1982. I started in 81, and I think 82 was when I picked up a flyer from these folks, and I learned how to homebrew. So it was still a new thing because back then a lot of folks didn't realize you can make your own beer at home since it was illegal, and especially since you just went to the store and bought beer, and beer wasn't a huge thing back then. It was you either bought Bud or Miller or Coors, and if you splurged, you got an import. So becoming a home brewer, there wasn't a lot of inspiration from outside to become a home brewer. But I thought this was cool. You can make your own beer at home, so why not try it? So I did.
And you learned right from the font. I mean, Charlie Papazian, then that's the epicenter of homebrewing right there. The Relax, Don't Worry, Have a Homebrew started right there.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah, Charlie and company up there, they, a lot of people thought they were a little bit eccentric, but they were having a lot of fun. And they actually started Boulder Brewing Company back then. I believe Boulder Brewing is the oldest continuously operated modern craft brewer, because it started back then with Charlie was a little bit involved, or at least there are pictures of him at the original site of Boulder Beer, which started in a goat shed. And, but yeah, they started I guess the very starts of modern craft brewing. Although when you talk to historians, some people argue that Anchor Steam was the start, and others will definitely point to New Albion,
right,
as the true start. And I would have to agree, New Albion probably was the very true start. when was it Jack McAuliffe got out of the Navy and realized they didn't have the beers he liked here, and so he built his own brewery at a time when nobody would have done that, and that was I believe 1978, and he welded his own equipment, built his own little brewery, and the rest is history.
Yeah, Jack lives in Northwest Arkansas, coincidentally, and I've got a chance to spend some time with him, and he's quite a character and quite an innovator, and it really has been a kick to get to know him. So you started homebrewing there in the epicenter of homebrewing, and then for your formal education, part of your formal education, you went to Belgium. And how did studying and living in Belgium affect your beer knowledge?
Well, prior to that, like I said, here in the States, beers were I really didn't think a lot about beers and brewing because I remember when I graduated, I remember my favorite beer back then was, the one out of Oregon as you drive into Oregon, that big one out of Oregon and Portland. And it used to be a huge brewery up there. That was my favorite beer back then. And it was a regional brewer. And then I remember trying Boulder beer, and in those days, Boulder beer wasn't filtered. It was a kind of a cloudy beer, and they had a porter. They had I think a pale ale, and since it wasn't filtered, their advertising campaign was called the Ugly Brew, and they had a little paper bag, a miniature one, over the top of each bottle. Because they said it's the Ugly Brew, and put a paper bag over it because you don't want to see it when you're drinking it. And it was a crazy advertising campaign, which it got me to try it, and I thought, well, that's okay beer. It's really different, but it didn't get me hooked on craft beer because back then I liked the English ales, so I would buy English ales, and then I went to Belgium. And in Belgium, that's when my eyes were really opened because I started in 1988 working on my PhD over there. And immediately I was immersed in what was a true beer culture. The campus I studied on was called the CERIA campus, which is a French acronym. It stands for the Center for Teaching and Research in the Food Industries. And on that campus, they taught the brewers how to brew, the chefs, all the culinary arts. They taught the chocolate makers how to make chocolate. They had a hotel and restaurant management school. So it was really everything about the food industries rolled into one campus. And so it was a huge amount of exposure to beer culture. And it was amazing because I saw that before any of that came to America, and I thought, this is really, really cool. Because at that time, 1988, there weren't a lot of Belgian beers in the U.S. Chimay was imported. There may have been one or two other Belgian Trappists that were imported, but Belgian beer was almost unheard of in the States. And here I was living there, learning French, Flemish, experiencing the culture, living with the Belgians. My wife and I, we got married right before going to Belgium, and that was our honeymoon. So we traveled quite a bit throughout Belgium and learned all the most of the customs, culture. It was just amazing. And I thought, when I graduated, I thought, this has to come to the States because beer is a whole new animal here compared to the United States. And so that was really the impetus for starting Blue Moon.
And so Blue Moon really does have, in a way, some Belgian roots. And you sort of revitalized a style that had almost been forgotten, the Belgian wit.
Right. I fell in love with that style when I was over there because it's I used to go to the local cafes. Well, they would call cafes what we call pubs. Uh, so you'd go to a local cafe and sit outside in the summertime and just drink down a couple pints of. Actually, they didn't have pints. Their standard serving was 33 centiliters, which is pretty small compared to our standards. But drink a couple glasses of wit. They would call it wit beer in Flemish and blanche in French. But yeah, you could just drink it and really have a great, satisfying time. And it was just thirst quenching. And I thought, that's so delicious. But and as your listeners know, the style has been around for a long, long time in Belgium. It almost died off to the point where there were just a couple of breweries left, one in Hoegaarden and one in Leuven. The one in Hoegaarden went under, and then a few years later was kind of restarted. The style was restarted by Pierre Celis. I think the one in Leuven was still going. But yeah, Hoegaarden was the one that that was the one that really became famous, because Pierre, when he restarted it, as he was a milkman, and he just kind of remembered that brewery when he had worked there a little bit as a young man, and really missed that style of beer. So he gave up everything to restart the brewery and change the course of brewing history. And a lot of other brewers copied the style to the point where if you go over there even today and talk to some of the traditional wit beer brewers, they'll all tell you that they brew, their version is the more correct version, or their version is the kind of the standard. And really, when you think about it, there really is no true standard of wit beer, because what Pierre did was reminiscent of what was produced in Hoegaarden and the town of Hoegaarden. And each community had their own take on the style. So if you go to Bruges, theirs is slightly different. If you go out to anywhere in Flanders, each town is going to be slightly different. And it's but they're all unique in their own way, and to me they're all delicious. And so that style is so varied, but it's really what was the impetus for me creating Blue Moon.
And Peter Broekhaert, we interviewed Peter Broekhaert, formerly of New Belgium, and when I asked him how to brew the styles of beer that he brewed, he got offended, because he said, we don't brew styles, we brew art, we brew 10 minutes of pleasure, so. I guess the Belgian attitude toward quote unquote styles are being put into, cubby holes of different types of beer is kind of different from the way we look at it over here.
You're absolutely right. They really brew kind of to tradition and to taste. And if you say, "Oh, that's a style, that's a Flanders Red," or that's, you tell them a style, and they'll look at you with a strange, squinty face because they're talking about. But yeah, you're right. A lot of them don't believe in styles. They'll offer you one type of beer and another type, but for them, it's really brewed. It's an art, and it's brewed according to taste. My professor was brewing professor was pretty strong in promoting the fact that when you brew, you really should brew a beer that tastes great, it goes well with food, and it has a certain amount of drinkability to it, meaning whether it is a table beer or a super strong triple, quadruple, you should be able to consume, a couple, maybe even 3 glasses of it with no issue. And he would point to Duvel, which is I think that's a 9% alcohol beer. And to me, that is the ultimate example because it's very drinkable. And, a lot of people get in trouble because they drink. By their third one, it's hard to stand up. And just because of that, the great taste and the drinkability. And that's exactly what my professor would drum into the heads of his brewing students. And And then going back to Peter, I've known Peter for a long time. He's great. He was the brewmaster there at New Belgium for quite a few years. And it's funny because when New Belgium started, it was 1992, I believe. I had come back from Belgium with my PhD, and my wife and I gave Jeff a call and said, hey, we read that you're opening up a Belgian-style brewery, and we just got back. Can we go up and tour and taste the beer? And he said, sure. So we went up, and he showed us his brewery. He had built the tanks himself, and they were in his basement. There was I think a mash tun, a brew kettle, and then some 3 fermenters. And I remember tasting the beers, and they were they had a certain sourness there. And I said, these taste like they're slightly infected. And I said, where do you culture your yeast? And he said he didn't. And he said he would get the yeast out of bottles of Chimay. And I said, oh. And I don't know if he knew at that time that they used usually sometimes they would use a lager yeast to bottle condition. Sometimes they would use a different ale yeast to bottle condition. Mm-hmm. Anyway, that's what he used for his original beers. And I said, well, I can culture it for you and purify it if you want. And he said, yeah. And so I would culture his beers or his yeast, and he'd come up to our house every 3 months or so to get fresh yeast. And then I helped him to kind of streamline and mainstream the Fat Tire beer, because the original one was robust compared to the times. It would be great. I think the original Fat Tire would be a great beer to launch today, a retro, because it had more chocolate malt, more bitterness, more body. And what I advised him was to cut back on that chocolate malt, cut back on the bitterness, and lighten up the body so people could appreciate it and buy more of it, and that way he could fund his adventures to create new beers. And then I helped him bring his brewmasters over. The first one was Floris Delay from Antwerp, and then Floris left after a couple years, 3 years maybe. And so I helped Jeff get Peter, and I wrote to the Immigration and Naturalization Service to get Peter his green card. And he brought his wife over, and and they've been here ever since.
Wow. Before we get into the cannabis content, let's take a quick break to talk about our friends and sponsors at Tavour. If you listen to the show, you know about Tavour. It's a great way to select delicious craft beers that you may not be able to find in your area and have them delivered to you. It's not a Beer of the Month club where somebody chooses beer for you and they just mysteriously show up randomly at your door. You only pay for the beer that you choose over the course of the month. Signing up for Tavour is free. Just create an account at Tavour.com, T-A-V as in Victor, O-U-R.com, and download their iPhone or Android app, and you'll receive notifications for 2 new beers each day that are available for purchase with in-depth tasting notes from Philip at Tavour. This month, look for Crowns and Hops, Brew Gentleman, Eris Brewing and Cider House, Wake Brewing, East End, Trogs Brewing, Central Coast Brewing, and By All Means. If you're not interested in the beers you see, don't worry. Just skip the ones that you don't want. However, when you see something you do, and you will, don't wait. Just click on it to get it and add it to your crate. Your beer arrives fresh every few weeks, allowing you enough time to fill a box and pay the least shipping. Isn't that smart? Why don't you check it out? It doesn't cost anything to sign up, and there is no obligation to purchase anything, ever. In fact, if I can ask you a favor, go to Tavour.com, T-A-V as in Victor, O-U-R.com, or download the app, and when you sign up, be sure to enter the promo code Basic Brewing, that's all one word, and you'll get $10 off your first shipment of $25 or more. Again, it's free to sign up, and there's no obligation to purchase. Sign up at Tavour.com or with the Tavour app, and enter Basic Brewing as the promo code. See, I tell you, Keith, we got hours of content here. You're opening all these doors that I want to ask more questions to go into, but the topic that brought you on the show was when you left, you retired from Blue Moon. You didn't quit. you started another venture, and this one is not based on traditional historic styles, but something brand new. So and you mentioned the name CERIA already, but you started into the new world of cannabis-based beers. So talk about how that came about.
Sure, yeah. So when I retired from Blue Moon after I forgot how many years, my wife and I wanted to stay in the world of beer, but we were really interested in cannabis because I retired in January of 2018, and cannabis had become legal in 2012 in the state of Colorado. It was December of 2012. So we thought, let's look into this cannabis industry and see if there's a way we can do something. And it didn't take us long before we thought, you know what? The main way people consume cannabis is by smoking. And that's really antisocial. It's not very healthy. And there's a lot of people who have asthma who can't be around smoke. So for a number of reasons, the main way people consumed cannabis really was not appealing. And we thought, you know what, if we figured out how to put it into a beer, beer is the most social thing people can consume and have fun. And if we made a beer with cannabis, that would be a way to bring cannabis to the masses in a socially acceptable format that's easy to drink and easy to have fun with. So that became our goal, and it took us a few months. In retrospect, it was pretty a short timeline, but it just took us a few months to figure everything out, to go from the start, which we actually incorporated CERIA in December of 2017. So right before I retired, we incorporated, and then right after I retired, I think January 5th, we got to work and started figuring out everything about the beer, the branding, and by December of 2018, we had a product on the shelf.
And these are non-alcoholic beers?
Yeah, James, because the main thing is, or not the main, one of the main things we found out right away was that you cannot legally sell a product that has both alcohol and cannabis in it. When you combine the two, that is absolutely prohibited, both at the federal level, because the TTB, which is the agency that oversees brewers, they make it absolutely clear you cannot put anything federally illegal into alcoholic beverages. And at the state level, the authorities who regulate cannabis make it crystal clear that you can't put alcohol into any cannabis product. So at the state level and the federal level, they both exclude the mixing of alcohol and cannabis. So I had to reach back in my memory banks to remember all the tricks and science of creating great tasting non-alcoholic beers that I had learned during my time in Belgium. So I did that, created a lot of recipes, and then the next thing we had to figure out was, when you extract the cannabinoids from cannabis plant, they exist in an oil form, very similar to the way hops exist as an oil. And I'm positive your listeners, if they've ever done a hop rub test, where you get the cones and rub them between your hands to evaluate them, your hands become almost sticky with that resin from the hops. It's an oily resin, and that's where all the flavor is. And in a similar way, in cannabis, all the flavor is in the oily fraction. Rather than hop cones, the cannabis plant has little structures called trichomes, and that's where all the cannabinoids and all the really nice fragrant aromas are. So, but again, they're oily, so we had to figure out how to get that oil into a water beverage, which is like beer, or in our case, non-alcoholic beer. So we worked with a co-packer and found out how to emulsify it, and we found out that it's just like mixing vinegar and oil to make a salad dressing. You can put olive oil and vinegar together in a container, shake it up, and pour it on a salad. But if you shook it up and left it in the container, you would see the two separate. You would see the oil separate from the water phase in a matter of minutes. But what some chefs do is they'll put emulsifiers in, like vegetable gums or egg products, even a little bit of sugar. They'll put things in to help emulsify and keep the two phases together as one mixture. And so that's what we had to do with cannabis. We had to figure out how to do that. And turns out there are a number of ways you can emulsify the cannabis oils and get them to go into solution. So we did that, and the rest is history, because we put it into our beer and had a Belgian white, non-alcoholic, but with 5 milligrams of THC.
And now you've expanded into just having non-alcoholic beers that are being distributed more widely than the cannabis version. So if people see the brand name on the shelf, this CERIA brand name, they can if it's like in Arkansas, they can assume that it doesn't have the cannabis products in it. But you've also got a book coming out from Brewers Publications in August called Brewing with Cannabis: Using THC and CBD in Beer. So you're talking to mostly homebrewers out there. So we can get into the weeds, so to speak, Keith, and pardon the pun. It was I couldn't stop it. I saw it coming down, and I couldn't stop. But give us you say is brewing with oil the way to go rather than using the plant product itself, or is there a way that you can integrate the cannabis plant product itself successfully in brewing with beer?
Well, thanks for bringing up the book. It's it'll be out August 1st, and it's titled Brewing with Cannabis. And your listeners, if they're listening prior to August 1st, they can go on the web, typically just Amazon, and type in Brewing with Cannabis, and the cover of the book will pop up so you can see what it looks like. And it's geared towards home brewers, also toward craft brewers, because I've got a chapter in there that talks about the legalities, sales and marketing of these type of products, and packaging of these type of products, the history of it. Then I give a chapter that has quite a few homebrew recipes. And from a homebrewing perspective, I talk about how you can mix cannabis into an alcoholic homebrew, but I also talk about how a homebrewer can get rid of the alcohol in the beer and make a non-alcoholic beer with cannabis. So it's all of that. And at the end of the day, I think the reader will come away with a whole new picture of cannabis. The reasons why it was made illegal, which it's not because it was highly addictive or this terrible drug that so many people painted it as. Rather, it's a very plant that a lot of people in the 1930s looked at as the cause for social problems, for it posed a threat to the profits of certain companies, which I spell out in the book, and there was a pretty high degree of I guess just racial bigotry tied in with the illegal aspects of the plant. In those days, the main person responsible was Harry Anslinger from the I think it was called the CBN, or FBN, sorry, the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, which is a forerunner to the DEA. It's documented that he was pretty much a racist, and he really didn't like the plant either. He didn't like people getting drunk or getting high on anything, and so he convinced a lot of his associates and contacts to really get this plant made illegal in the United States. So prohibitions went up in, I believe, 1937, and have been in place ever since, except for the state-by-state legalization aspects that have been started since 2012.
So back to the brew pot, Keith. I'm trying to extract some secrets before the book comes out. So should we stick with oil, or if people have legally growing marijuana plants on their property, could they use the actual plant products?
Of course, yeah. So in the book, I have a chapter on how to grow the plants, how to harvest and extract the cannabinoids, then how to make them water soluble. So it really is fairly easy. The main thing to do, though, is you do have to, as you harvest, you want to keep as much of the trichome material as possible. Similar to when you harvest hops, the lupulin powder will sometimes leak out, and you'll lose some. But it's in your best interest to keep as much of that lupulin powder as possible if you want a nice fragrant IPA. Mm-hmm. In vein with cannabis, you want to maintain as much of that trichome material as possible to get as much of the aroma and the cannabinoids as possible. And so you harvest, you age it, and then you extract it. So when you extract it, you can extract typically with alcohol. That's the easiest way to do it, to make a tincture, which is going to be very rich in cannabinoids. And I don't want to give away too much of the book, so I'm not going to tell you exactly how. But then the key is that a lot of people think you can get high on that right away. But it turns out you can't, because THC has to be activated. And what people will find out from the book is that cannabis and hops are cousins in the plant family called Cannabaceae. So if you look at the tree, the family tree in this family of Cannabaceae, you'll see the hops, which is Humulus lupulus, the scientific name, and then you'll see the cannabis plants, Cannabis sativa, and they are very closely related. Both have the female plants producing the desired material, hops from the female hop plant and the buds from the female cannabis plant. And then you'll see that as they grow, you want to harvest those cones or the trichomes, but you can't just eat the trichomes and get high. You have to activate them the way that you do with hops. If you try to brew with a hop, the reason it gets bitter in the beer is because you isomerize the alpha acids and you turn them into iso alpha acids, or else isomerized alpha acids. That's what tastes bitter. In cannabis, you need to decarboxylate the THC and all the cannabinoids to make them active. So you'll find THC-A, which is called THC acid, and that won't make you high. But once you decarboxylate it and get rid of that acid, it becomes activated THC, or what we call delta-9 THC. And that's the thing that goes into your body and gives you a intoxication. So it's got to be decarboxylated. And then after that, you can put that tincture in your beer and make a cannabis beer. So yeah, it's step by step, just like brewing. As your listeners learn how to brew, they learn the different steps of using hops, whether it's at first using hops for bittering, then late hopping for aroma, and then dry hopping for even more aroma. And then if they really want to get high amounts of bitterness, they get high alpha plants. And get these amazing 70 to 90 IBU IPAs, imperial IPAs, and by the same token, you can do the same thing with cannabis and get create beers with different cannabinoids and different flavors and different levels of intoxicant.
So is there a similar paradigm with when you boil hops for a certain amount of time, you get an isomerization rate, or you get an efficiency of the bitterness extraction? Is there a parallel with the THC component as well?
There is, but there's not a lot of science to answer that question conclusively, because it still is illegal federally, and so because of that, there aren't a lot of scientists and universities willing to risk their federal funding to study the plant. So what you have to do is either do your own experiments or rely on some of the science that's been done overseas. In particular, in Israel, they've done some work on the chemistry of it, but not really on the decarboxylation side. There is also some work on decarboxylation by American companies that are specialized in cannabis. So to answer the question, we can't answer conclusively, but it's similar. It does involve heat, and and you can read in the book the chapter on decarboxylation and kind of see some of the things you can do that work. So there are definitely things that work, and if you just apply the principles, you'll get fully decarboxylated THC, which you can then use in your favorite home brew.
So what about the flavor component? With hops, you boil a hop for 60 minutes, you get one flavor. You boil, you put it just at the end of the boil, or you do a hop stand, you get a completely different flavor. Are the cannabis components, do they react in the same way? Can you build a recipe with different flavor components, like an IPA or something, by adding it at different points of the process?
Absolutely. So your listeners are very familiar with the different varieties of hops. So if you want to make a classic American IPA, you're probably going to pick out Citra, Cascade, and any of the very citrusy hop profiles, or you may even go towards the more tropical ones. But you'll use those varieties to create those specific products. You can also find, I should say that those aromas, the aromatic compounds that are in the hops, are called terpenes, which I think some of your listeners may be familiar with that term, terpenes. Those are the volatile aromas from that. They're produced by the hop plant, and they give each variety its classic smell. They don't provide any bitterness. The bitterness in hops come from the alpha acids, which become isomerized. In cannabis, you have a very similar type of chemistry. The cannabinoids will provide physiological changes or effects in the body, such as the THC will provide intoxication. CBD will get people tired. CBG will help with sleep. THCV will give people kind of energy like a Red Bull and minimize their appetite. So a lot of different things happening with those cannabinoids. And the one thing is that they're all bitter, but they're not the same bitterness as hop bitterness, cannabinoid bitterness. And I talk about that in the book. It's a perceived bitterness. So when you shoot for a certain level of IBU, with the cannabinoids, you have to compensate on the hop side and adjust down or up depending on the level of cannabinoids. And with terpenes from the hop or from the cannabis plant, many of them are the same that you find in hops, again, because the two plants are cousins. The majority of the terpenes consists of myrcene. So if you look at any hop variety, the bulk of the aroma is going to be myrcene. And then there are other types of compounds, such as humulene. I'm sure your listeners have heard of some of those terpenes. You also have humulene in the hop plant. And then you have other terpenes, too, that give specific aromas to the plant. And some of your readers who may have visited a dispensary will be familiar with those strain names, which are usually derived from that terpene profile. So you have some called Girl Scout cookies because it smells almost like Girl Scout cookies. And you've got these other crazy names, but when you smell the plant, you'll smell that characteristic aroma that is the impetus for the name. And it's all because of the terpenes. And you can dry hop or dry pot, I guess, if you will, and get those terpene profiles into your beer. But unless you decarboxylate it, you won't get the THC to be activated and make people high. You'll just get that aromatic portion.
So in theory, you could make in the same way that you make a non-alcoholic beer, not intoxicating, you could make a cannabis beer by dry potting, as you say, and have some of the flavor characteristics without it being intoxicated in that way as well?
Yes, yeah, you can put the cannabis terpenes in and get the aromas. And in fact, if your listeners may have had Hemper Pale Ale from New Belgium. They experimented with the terpenes from the hemp plant, which are almost identical to the ones from marijuana. And they were able to isolate the terpenes and put them into the beer called Hemperor. And so you've got those terpenes there that make it smell like I forgot which strain of hemp they used, but it smells like marijuana, has no intoxicating effects. And so you could do the same thing with the home brew. But if you grow your own hemp or your own marijuana where it's legal, you can dry pot the beer and end up with a non-intoxicating beer that smells like cannabis.
Now, I'm assuming that in the CERIA THC, CBD beers, you're still using hops, right? Can you make an IPA that kind of tastes like an IPA or has the bitterness of an IPA without using hops and by using the cannabis products?
You could, but the bitterness of the cannabis products isn't as intense as the bitterness of hops. And I talk about that in the book. And in fact, CERIA also has an IPA that we make. It's a West Coast IPA that has about 40 to 42 IBUs in it. And it has 10 milligrams of THC plus 10 milligrams of CBD. And the terpenes are mainly from the dry hopping with Amarillo and Cascade. We put a little bit of Citra, but Amarillo gives this really strong citrusy orange-like character to the beers, which we thought really worked well with the cannabis. And they don't smell like cannabis. They don't have the terpenes that make it smell like cannabis. We focused, in fact, all of our beers that we make focus on the smell and taste of craft beer with the effects of cannabis. So that's our goal. And who knows, sometime in the future, we may have competitors, maybe even one of your listeners may open their own cannabis brewery where it's legal and start producing beers that actually smell and taste like marijuana. But our goal is to make beers that smell and taste like craft beer, but with the effects of cannabis.
Yeah, there are hop varieties that people call dank. So it seems like there's a lot of crossover in the flavor characteristics. Sometimes are there varieties of cannabis that lend themselves more toward different beer styles, or are they all going to be kind of like American IPA kind of flavor components and aroma components?
Well, with cannabis, there are some terpenes that are very, very similar, if not identical to hop varieties, but there is always a component in there, which some researchers describe it as MBT. And that And for your listeners, sorry, I didn't want to be too scientific, but for your listeners out there who are unfamiliar with MBT, 1-methyl-2-butene-3-thiol, it's the compound that smells skunky in beer. So and as any of your listeners, they can pour any beer out into a glass, put it in the sunshine for just a couple minutes, and that beer will turn skunky because the hop compounds, the iso-alpha acids, will break apart and they will form MBT, which is a sulfury thiol compound that smells skunky. And it's that same compound that a lot of people believe makes pot smell like pot. And so because of that MBT that's in the marijuana, you can't just swap out marijuana for hops and get a beer-like flavor. It'll always smell like cannabis because of that component. But as an aside, my daughter and I published a paper last year showing how brewers can actually prevent the light struck flavor in beer. And it turns out that just by the addition of a small amount, microscopic amount of copper, using copper salts, it'll clean up that skunky aroma, so you can produce Corona and Heineken and all these other beers that traditionally have skunkiness without that skunky aroma. And we've had a lot of interest in brewers around the world asking us about that technology we published last year.
I bet. Well, that would be useful because I can't tell you how, the many times that I've sat out in the sun with a hoppy IPA and, I thought to myself, I better drink this pretty quickly or it's gonna skunk on me and it does happen very quickly.
And in my book, I actually have a homebrew recipe for a 1970s lager. I don't know if I called it Smokey and the Bandit lager or what, but a nice, I think a 20 IBU lager that actually has a small amount of copper added, so that you can actually make a homebrew of it and take it in the sun and drink it without it turning skunky.
So, are there, and again, not tipping the hat too much to what's in the book, but you mentioned emulsifiers. Do you encourage homebrewers when they're using the I almost said hop oils, but the cannabis oils, to use an emulsifier in the brewing process? Is that part of it?
They can, and in the book I talk a little more about that. But the most practical way is just to make a tincture with alcohol and use that in a 5-gallon batch. If you're making a big batch the way we do, that's when you need emulsifiers. But for a very small batch, 5-6 gallons, even 10 gallons, it's easier just to do it from a homebrew perspective. Easier and almost as accurate to just extract with alcohol and use a tincture and then dose that in to the beer as it ages. And because the other thing you have to do is, like I said, you've got to decarboxylate it to activate it. If a brewer wants to make it active, and as a tincture, that's easy to do, as I describe in the book.
And it seems like to me that if you wanted to skip the process of growing your own, there are products, commercially available products, through the proper channels, of course, that are THC oils and CBD oils where they could just use those and make a tincture and use those in the beer.
Yes and no. The oils that are available for purchase, a lot of them are provided for smokable products. And so those depend on the heat to decarboxylate all the components. So, if anybody does want to get oils, they will either have to decarboxylate those oils or search out for some that have been previously decarboxylated. And there are some out there, not very common, but there are some out there. It's just that they would be a little more expensive. And the majority of people who buy the oils, like I said, use them in dab rigs and other types of apparatus to get high, or they use the oils in cooking. They'll make like brownies, cookies, and things that are exposed to high heat and will decarboxylate the cannabinoids.
Well, Keith, as you can tell, I'm out of my depth in this. I'm not I'm a cannabis lightweight, and I don't have a lot of experience with it. But this is very interesting stuff, and I'm the book again is Brewing with Cannabis Using THC and CBD in Beer, and I'm very intrigued by the conversation about the non-alcoholic component, because we've talked about that on the show before, and it's tricky on the homebrew level, or at least up until we read your book, it seems like a tricky process. So I'm looking forward to the book, and I certainly appreciate the large amount of time that you spent with us, and I feel like we're just scratching the surface.
Yeah, it is amazing. I've been in the category now. Well, I've been a professional brewer since 1986, and a home brewer since 1982, and then I've been in the cannabis world since the start of 2018, so it's already over 3 years. So I've learned quite a bit on the cannabis side, and you're right, we are just scratching the surface. And I have a PhD in brewing, and to me, I learn something new about brewing every day. So it's just such a fascinating subject, brewing, cannabis, and when you put them together, you're right. We're just scratching the surface. There's so much more to learn and do, because someday in the future, cannabinoids, we're going to find out that cannabinoids can have all kinds of curative properties and very useful properties too. People will someday be able to use specific cannabinoids for sleeping, for weight loss. There are even some that can take the place of Viagra. I mean, there's just so many uses for these compounds. There are over 100 cannabinoids in the cannabis plant, and at this point in time, scientists only know what a few of, maybe 8 or 9 of these things can do. All the rest have not been identified, and so some people say that you can cure cancer with some of these cannabinoids. So just so much work to do, and yeah, back to your point, we're just scratching the surface. So I hope at least one of your listeners will take up that torch and start doing some research and figure out what all these cannabinoids do, and who knows, that one of those listeners may win the Nobel Prize. We'll see.
Well, I hope they give us credit when
credit to James, and maybe 10%.
Thanks very much, Keith.
Oh, thank you, James. It's been a lot of fun. And if you want to talk again, just reach out. Be glad to spend another hour with you.
Well, thanks again to Keith. Brewing with Cannabis Using THC and CBD in Beer is available for pre-order now. And I'm hoping that Keith will come back after I get a chance to read the book in August. And be on the lookout for CERIA brand beers in both their NA and cannabis versions, wherever you are. If you have brewing questions, show suggestions, or just want to say howdy, write to James at basicbrewing.com, or just fill out the contact form on basicbrewing.com. And please don't forget to tell us where you're from. Check out our mobile-friendly shop at basicbrewingshop.com. Thanks to everybody supporting us through our Patreon page. Special goodies coming your way. Check all that out at patreon.com/basicbrewing. It's all until next time. Until then, thanks for listening, everybody. I'm James Spencer. Production note for Basic Brewing Radio and our website is provided by Kelly Dodson. Basic Brewing Radio is a production of Active Voicing. We'll talk to you next time, everybody. In the meantime, stay well and stay tuned. So long.